Hello everyone, in this short video I'm going to talk about primary data and secondary data. So what primary data, or what is primary data? Nowadays people prefer what is primary data and why collect them, and if we are going to collect them, how can we do that? So what is primary data? Basically means you collect them by yourselves, right? You are the primary investigator. You collect the data, then that's the primary data. So here's an example. So this is after Hurricane Michael, a short article plus a picture from New York Times. It says, was it a miracle, grace, or shared planning that left this one house standing in an area of destruction along Mexico Beach after Hurricane Michael? Now the first question is this qualitative data? Yes, pictures, right? Is this primary data? Now this is a bit tricky. It depends, right? If you are the photographer, to you that's the primary data. But if you're just the reader of New York Times, that can't count a primary data because you didn't collect them. It's news archival, it's qualitative, but to you that will be a secondary data. So why we collect primary data? The main reason is no existing old data suitable to answer your research questions, right? You have a research question, you can't find any existing data that can help you answer the questions. Then of course you need to collect your primary data. But primary data, to collect them, is sometimes costly and burdensome, right? Not everyone can afford to collect primary data. But if collect the primary data is not a burden to you, then maybe, if it's much easier for you to do so, maybe you should. So when should you conduct a survey to collect primary data? First is you need to ask yourself, do you know enough about the topic? If the answer is yes, then just go ahead, right? Then you need to ask yourself, does the information exist already in other source? In another source, if that's so, then use the secondary data. You don't need to collect the primary data. But if the answer is no, then go. Or can people tell you what you want to know? If the answer is yes, then go, because you think you can get the answer from your survey, then maybe your survey a good idea, right? But if you think, okay, even you throughout the survey, people will not give you the answer, then probably not a wise way to do it. Maybe conduct an interview or use secondary sources. Will people provide truthful answers? This is also a tricky question, right? It depends on how you frame your question. But generally speaking, we would believe when people respond to a survey, they are going to provide truthful answers. However, there are several issues related to this, right? One of the bigger challenges is social desirability. For example, if you ask whether or not people are willing to donate to a charity, most people would say, yes, or with a very high level of willingness. However, if you actually ask them to donate even $10, $20, right, many people would possibly reluctant to do so. So there's a gap between willingness and actual action. So, but in general, when you are conducting a survey, you genuinely believe people will provide you a truthful answer, right? So if that's the case, then go ahead. So how exactly can we collect the primary data by using survey? Generally speaking, you first need to identify the population and come up with a sampling strategy, because you need to decide use random, non-random sampling, and your sample size, like how large should your sample size be. So you develop your survey questionnaire. So Your survey questionnaire should be specific about your research purpose, right? Which means you need to embed it somehow your research question in your survey. You need to ask questions related to your dependent and independent variables, and you need to use different levels of measurement just to vary a bit, so people not feel burdensome or feel bored, then they quit the survey, because this is a voluntary participation, right? As we discussed in the research ethics class. Now, if possible, you need to pre-test your survey to see if it works, right? The wording choice, etc. And if it's a very large scale survey, usually national representative sample, maybe you need to recruit and train interviewers and ask them to do some of the job for you. And then you collect data and prepare data for analysis after collection. Then you analyze them and present your findings. Now, I haven't included anything related to communication, all right? Communicating your findings to decision makers and the general public. Now, we may understand the statistical meanings of all the tables, regressions, and the results you got from your finding, but how can you use plain language to communicate with people who are not familiar with the specific topic? Now, this is a big challenge actually facing the academy world, because then the informational gap between laymen and experts, right? So experts know all the details, but some of them are just terrible in communicating their findings to the public. While the public try to understand this, but they only can understand the research or which was presented in a plain language way. If you use too many technical language, then people will not understand your findings, right? So this is the gap should be shrinked or reduced by effective communication from the academic world, or we train generalists, policy analysts who can bridge the gap, right? So bridge the academy finding and the public understanding. All right, so the relationship between population and the sample. Now, since our aim for sampling is to generalize our finding to be applied to the whole population, then generally speaking, we would like, if possible, right, larger sample, representative sample, use random sampling strategy. But that's not always applied to all the cases, right? Especially if you are dealing with vulnerable, harder to reach groups, then snowball sampling is generally speaking a more suitable sampling strategy, because they are harder to reach. You can't just randomly sample them, okay? All right, so now how can you develop a survey questionnaire? Your survey questionnaire should include your research question in one way or another, as I mentioned. And also you need to come up with questions regarding your dependent and independent variables, and if possible, vary the levels of measurement, right? You can come up with, for instance, your dependent variable be continuous interval measures, while for your main independent variable, it can be a categorical one, right? Either ordered or nominal measurement. Or of course, you can use both of them, interval or ratio ones, right? So my point here is, if you have many variables, and you are trying to use survey questions to solicit the answers, then somehow it's better for you to vary the level of measurements. All right, so this is some steps or tips for you to design a survey questionnaire. So you can start with the survey purpose and the constructs. Don't forget to include informed consent at the beginning of the survey. And also realize that people can quit at any point for any reason, right? Even they don't give you a reason, then you just deal with it because this is voluntary participation. If you could ask only 1 or 2 questions, these questions should be related to your dependent and the main independent variable. All right. If you can only ask 1, that question should be about the relationship between your main independent variable and the dependent variable. All right, so you need to prepare mock tables and charts of survey results, right? Think about it. How are you going to present your results before you designing your survey questions? And look for prior surveys in your field or your specific topic, right? Just to borrow some best practice ideas. And you need to hook respondents with your first few questions. Otherwise, they are not interested, then they quit. Close-ended questions and open-ended questions. Now, it depends, right? So if you want to save time and try to incentivize people to complete the survey, then probably you should not include too many open-ended questions in surveys, right? But this is different for interviews. All right, so then some wording choice you need to be aware. Now, especially nowadays, we are more cautious about, for instance, gender-neutral terms, or do not use discriminative languages, and also avoid using offensive languages, right? So these are the things you need to worry about. Think about before you actually design distribute the survey. That's why pre-test is important, right? So people can let you know how they feel when they read the survey questions. All right, then physical and graphical design and for online survey. Right? Nowadays, you have so many online survey platforms that you can use and generally give you some personalization options. You can embed your institute's logo or a picture or some background choices, right? So just make it look beautiful, right? Make it attractive. All right, so all in all, you need to put yourself in your respondent's shoes. So the first thing after you design your survey, what you're going to do is pretend yourself as a respondent to take the survey, right? Go through it to see if that's appealing, to see if it's really a good survey. All right, so now suppose you already designed your survey, right? You have your survey in your hand and it looks gorgeous. It's ready to go. All right, so then you need to design the mode of survey data collection. Are you going to do like an intercept interview surveys? Say you are going to sit in a shopping mall, and then every 5th person, right, you are going to intercept him or her and say, okay, I'm going to conduct the interview. Will you be willing a couple seconds, minutes to complete the survey? Then they probably say yes or no, right? Especially this is if this is related to a product, then shopping mall might be a good idea, right? So if you want to investigate students' satisfaction about universities, then student cafeteria may be a good location, etc. And if you are interested in national representative sample, then household interview survey or telephone survey, mail survey, these are the choices. Now for group self-administered survey like school, workplace, community centers, etc. Right? So you basically contact the person who's in charge, and then ask they to help you distribute survey. And most frequent used survey methods is use online survey. You have platforms like SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics that you can use, right? Even Google Sheets, Google Forms. You can use Google Forms to do that as well. But really, the problem is with the distribution, right? Not all the people are online. That's just a fact. Older people tend to be less involved in online activities, especially if you are distributing your survey link through social media, then you may attract more young people than older ones. So to be parallel or comparable to the population, remember our purpose is to generalize the finding to be applied to the population, right? If we want to make certain statistical inference, then we need to make our sample to be more representative, right? If you lost a large chunk of older people, then that won't be able to make your findings more generalizable. So the idea is when you're distributing your online survey, be cautious about that. Then you mix modes, of course, right? You can do online, mail, and telephone together, etc., right? So if you have the time and the resource and the budgets to do that. Okay, so these are the modes of survey data collection. Now there's many other ways you can collect primary data. That's related to, generally speaking, if you are going to use trained observation, right? So you are going to do ethnography or some qualitative studies, then you go to the field, right, which is time consuming, but it's also rewarding sometimes. Not always, but it's sometimes it's rewarding. All right, so this is called trained observation. Why you need to be trained before you go to the field to observe and taking notes? Because if you are not trained, you probably got lost. You don't know how to systematically record the indicators, right? So that's why you need a certain training before entering into the field, so that you know what kind of things you are going to record them in what way. The most important thing is to record them in a systematic way so that you can use them later on in your analysis. And also you have scientific instruments to help you to collect primary data. That uses a lot in medical science, health science, neuroscience, etc. Right. So, for instance, fMRI, which is using an equipment to scan the brain and to detect the activities in brain. So these will be primary data, but that's generally speaking, these equipments are not cheap. Right? So for natural science research, especially for psychology, neuroscience, medical science, health science, these usually require more expensive equipments, right? So which means you need possibly you need to establish a lab, and you need to invite participants, right? And then you need to invest in these equipments. All right, so then nowadays we are in a big data era. So you possibly can get data, primary data, by using algorithm or computer codes to extract these data. Now, for instance, social media data, right? So there's tons of tweets or Facebook pages. Now the problem is what kind of machine learning methods you are going to use to get the data and train the data and do the analysis, right? So, but these are all also considered primary data. One controversy about social media data is some would argue that, okay, this is just, it's already there, right? The social media data, textual data, they are already there. So that should be counted as secondary data. But if you are the person who are actually collect them and put them in a data format, that will, I think, counts primary data, because even the big data, the tweets, the Facebook page, and many other things are out there online, but they are not in a data format, right? So before you collecting them, constructing them into a data frame, I probably will not say this is the secondary data. It's only the data is there, but they are not in a data format. They are not ready for analysis. All right, so use secondary data, of course, have some benefits as well, right? So it's less time consuming and fewer resources are required, and also maybe required as part of an administrative or planning process. So the administrative data is already there. So you're under the Open Government Movement, or because of the Freedom of Information Act, you can actually request for those administrative data because they are already there and nobody's looking at them. They are just a waste the opportunity to be analyzed there, right? And also, as I said, the big data, right? It depends on how you view this, but my sense for big data is if they are not in a data format, then if you collect them, put them in a construction, the data set, then it counts for primary data, right? It's no different than you go to the field, take notes, and put them in a data format. All right, one final thing, right? One scholar's primary data can be another scholar's secondary data if the data is shared publicly. All right, I think that will be all for primary and secondary data. One thing I want to emphasize here is if we focus on using survey to collect primary data, you need to know how to design your survey questionnaire and how to construct your survey questions so that you can solicit answers to your dependent and independent variables. Right? If you collect all these data and analyze them, that will help you answer your research question. All right, that will be all for this short video. Thank you.